We'll bring this meeting to order. Good morning, and certainly we'd like to welcome Mr. Richard Griffin, the Deputy, the Deputy Inspector General for the Veterans Administration, to discuss his office's oversight efforts at the Veterans Administration. This is probably one of the most active periods in recent memory for your office, Mr. Griffin, with your audits of whistleblower allegations and the waitlist scandal reports that you're required to make to Congress by the Choice Act. You've also had to respond to recent charges that your office has fallen a little bit short on transparency by failing to release some investigative reports. Members of the subcommittee will no doubt have many questions on many areas of your oversight, and we understand that you have a personal engagement that requires you to leave at 11:30 this morning, and we'll do our best to honor that. But with all the issues from the waitlist scandal to the construction challenges issue at Denver, and to so many other issues, I look forward to just getting right into this testimony. At this time, I'd like to ask our ranking member, Mr. Bishop, if he has any open remarks that he'd like to make.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for yielding. I believe that the Inspector General plays a vital role in ensuring that the programs that implemented actually work and that the funding is spent wisely. The IG last year, I think, was tasked with the difficult work of investigating the scandal in Phoenix, about which we were all appalled. In response to this investigation, which uncovered numerous issues, Congress moved forward on historic legislation, including the Veterans Choice Act, that will improve access to health care to veterans across the nation, which was signed into law in August. While this is an essential first step in addressing the systemic issues that are facing the Department of Veterans Affairs, there's still a lot of work to be done. And as we move forward, it's critical that the Inspector General have the necessary resources to conduct aggressive oversight to ensure that veterans are able to receive the health care that they need when they need it. It's vital that we change the culture that has been so infested within the VA, and to make sure that it doesn't resurface. No matter what steps the VA takes to address the challenges that it faces, it will not be able to move forward if we don't have proper oversight. So I commend you for the work that has been done over the last several months, but there's a lot yet to be done to repair the trust that has really been broken with our veterans and with American people for the veterans, the VA system. So I look forward, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, to working with the department to eliminate the issues that are raised by the IG. And I thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. Thank the ranking member. So, Mr. Griffin, your full statement will be entered into the record. Please introduce Mr. Daigh, who's with you at the witness table, and please summarize your testimony for us. And I know we're going to be interrupted by votes at some point, so we're going to try to move along as quickly as we can. So, thank you. Recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Bishop, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the work of the VA Office of Inspector General. In fiscal year 2014, our office issued 310 reports. We closed 880 investigations. We made 539 arrests, and we identified $2.3 billion in monetary benefits for a return on investment of $22 for every dollar in IG funding. In the first 5 months of FY 2015 alone, the IG has recovered in fines, penalties, restitution, and civil judgments actual money returned to the U.S. government equivalent to 91% of our enacted appropriations. Recoveries since FY 2011 are even more remarkable, with $3.1 billion in recoveries, which represents actual cash recoveries of $5.50 for every dollar spent on the IG's operations. In the past 6 years, we've issued more than 1,700 reports, made more than 3,000 arrests, and provided testimony at 69 congressional hearings. We conducted 400 briefings for members of Congress and staff, and responded to more than 1,300 written requests from various members of the House and the Senate. This level of productivity and information sharing with Congress is among the very highest in the IG community. During the 6 years, our work has been recognized by the Council of Inspector General for Integrity and Efficiency with 25 awards for excellence. The national attention sparked by reporting on waiting times and patient deaths at Phoenix Healthcare System has resulted in a dramatic increase in the number of contacts to the OIG hotline. In fiscal year 14, the OIG hotline received nearly 40,000 contacts, a 45% increase over fiscal year 13. We saw a similar increase in the number of inquiries from the members of Congress, with over 200 reflecting a 38% increase in congressional requests. We expect that these upward trends will continue. Recent attention to opioid prescription practices at the Tomah VAMC has generated interest in the OIG's practice of administrative closures. Let me be clear that our work at Tomah was painstaking and comprehensive. OIG physicians reviewed the clinical practice of providers to include quality assurance data and patient medical charts. We contacted the VA Police, the Drug Enforcement Agency, the Tomah and Milwaukee Municipal Police to determine if there was evidence of narcotic abuse at the Tomah VAMC. OIG investigators were involved in an attempt to find appropriate or illegal behavior on the part of providers or patients. Current and former Tomah pharmacists were interviewed. OIG staff reviewed the emails and other files from 17 employees at the Tomah VAMC. At the end of a 2.5-year review, we concluded that narcotic prescribing practices of some Tomah staff were at the outer boundary of acceptable narcotic prescribing, and we were unable to find evidence that illegal activity was occurring. While the decision was made to close the review without a public report, we did in fact brief Tomah and the network director who oversees Tomah, along with VHA central office people. In January of this year, I directed a review of administrative closures for FY 2014 to determine whether any adjustments were made to our internal policies. We found that 42% of the administrative closures were not substantiated. 54% were closed because when we arrived there, the facility had already taken sufficient action that resolved the issues, and 4% involved tort claims. I also directed a review of our decision-making practices on closing reviews administratively and instituted a new policy requiring coordination of administrative closures within the immediate office of the Inspector General, the office of the Counselor to the Inspector General, and our Release of Information Office. This process will ensure consistency in decision-making regarding when and how public release of related documents is handled. This week, we began publishing administrative closure reports on the OIG website. Additional reports will be published pursuant to the Freedom of Information Act as we complete the process of reviewing and redacting sensitive information. For fiscal year 2015, the OIG is funded at $126.4 million. The President's budget proposed $126.7 million for FY16, a 0.3% increase, which will require a reduction of 10 full-time employees. Without additional resources, we cannot meet the demands of increased congressional and other hotline contacts. It will be practically impossible to maintain our schedule for cyclical inspections of VA medical centers, outpatient clinics, VBA regional offices, and other national reviews. Our investigative staff is also stretched to the breaking point by the rise in threats and assaults, fiduciary fraud, drug diversion, identity theft, and service-disabled veteran-owned small business fraud. We believe an increase of $15 million over the FY15 enacted level will enable us to surpass our performance in terms of productivity, quality, and timeliness, and help meet the unprecedented increase in our workload. Mr. Chairman, we appreciate the committee's continued interest and support, which has included the addition of $5 million above the President's request during the last 2 fiscal years. This concludes our statement, and we would be happy to answer any questions you or any other member may have.
Thank you, Mr. Griffin. And I'll get to the TOMA issue in a moment, but I just wanted to first start with the waiting list scandal. Your office was obviously thrust in the epicenter of the wait list scandal last year. Your testimony indicates that you've undertaken 98 audits responding to allegations of scheduling manipulation, and that so far you referred 44 audits to the Department's Office of Accountability Review for administrative action. You're still working at the other 54 sites. Should we conclude from the 44 completed audits that scheduling manipulation was endemic to all the hospitals you visited, and are the violations you've identified matters of breaking the law or administrative malfeasance, and has the Department of Justice been willing to take any of these cases you've identified?
I can't say that 100% of the facilities were found to have been manipulating wait times, but I got it. I can't tell you, as I said here, if 100% of the facilities were manipulating wait times, but I can tell you it was certainly widespread throughout the system. We have presented these cases to the U.S. Attorney's Office. 33 of the cases that were presented have been declined for prosecution, with the suggestion that they be referred to the Department for Administrative Action, which is, of course, what we would do anyway. We have 8 that are still pending with DOJ, and of course, each individual U.S. Attorney's Office has their own caseload and their own decision matrix as to what they accept for prosecution and what they don't. But we certainly, any time that we had evidence of criminality, we presented these cases.
I guess really quickly, too, on the there are conflicting media reports in the wake of President Obama's visit to the Phoenix Hospital on, I guess, on Friday. One of the whistleblowers said that progress was being made and that terrific strides have been made in on-time appointments. Another of the whistleblowers dismissed any notion of progress and said that the VA was still gaming the system of appointment delays. What conclusions have you made about the pace of the progress from your most recent audits?
Well, we issued an interim report on Phoenix urology issues within the last 30 days. It's something that came to our attention when we were at Phoenix initially. We had to set it aside because we wanted to get the waiting times report out the door. We found some 750 veterans that were waiting for urology care for extended periods of time that appeared to be unaccounted for in the system. So there are issues. It took a long time for the system-wide to get into the state that we found it in, and I think it's going to take a long time to get it all straightened out.
And I'd like to also just follow up one last comment on Phoenix. After the Phoenix waitlist scandal, the VA took steps to reorganize and strengthen the Veterans Health Administration's Office of Medical Inspector, OMI, including creating an audit capacity for that office. What does the OMI do that's different from the OIG? Do the two groups often have the same cases?
We have a statutory requirement to oversee the work of the OMI. So we would never do duplicate work, because we would tell them that if they were going to do something, they would be in regular contact with Dr. Daigh's office. And it's not unlike our relationship with GAO. If we're doing an audit on a certain subject, it would make no sense. So
it's not redundant or duplicative.
But previously, as a medical inspector, they were the undersecretary's early warning mechanism. If there was something that he wanted them to go look at before it became a national crisis, he could dispatch his medical inspectors prior to it coming to anybody's attention, just based on one of his directors hopefully saying, I think we need someone to come out and take a look at this. the audit aspect is a new twist for them.
I'd like to quickly move to the Toma issue, if we could. Your office has obviously been embroiled in the Toma, Wisconsin VA hospital case of overprescription of opioid drugs, which gained a lot of national attention. And your office has faced some criticism for concluding the doctor's prescription policies were within the scope of practice. Last week, the department released its preliminary clinical findings on Toma and reported that the VA team found unsafe clinical practices at Toma in such areas as pain management and psychiatric care. The department also noted that the Toma Hospital had doubled the national average in simultaneous use. I'm going to pronounce it wrong. Benzodiazepine, I can't pronounce it. It's an opioids, a practice which is discouraged by official VA policy. These findings seem to indicate a significant problem. I guess the question is, why did the IG conclude that prescribing behavior was in the scope of practice, or you said they're maybe pushed an outer boundary? And then finally, and then I'll stop. Your office also had received some negative publicity recently. There was USA Today story back, I think, on March the 8th, related to the Toma case because you would administratively close the case without publicly releasing the report and response. I know you talked about it in the testimony, but on Tuesday you established a new policy that administrative closures would be decided centrally. Of the 140 reports that have not been released, you released 5 with sensitive information redacted, and your staff is reviewing the other 135. Could you tell us what the new central policy, just restate what that new central policy would be on releasing those reports? Will all reports, even those with confidential information and unsubstantiated allegations, be released with appropriate redaction? And is there no standard policy government-wide for IGs to follow about the circumstances in which IGs must release the reports from their investigations and their audits? So I kind of gave you 3 issues there. Toma, the most recent issue of the disclosure of the reports, and a standard for IGs generally.
Regarding the recent publication by Dr. Clancy, our work there covered a point in time from 11 to 13. And during that time, we looked at the specific patients and the specific medical records that were in play at that time. We are back in Toma now looking at some of the new allegations involving new patients, and we have another investigation ongoing there. But for it to be misunderstood that a current review somehow has application to the work that Dr. Daigh's team did isn't exactly the way it should be described. Your second question, I should have wrote them down. Oh, administrative closures. I can tell you that other IGs do administrative closures, and based on the percentages that I mentioned to you, we have 40,000 hotline requests, most of them with multiple issues they want us to look at. If we start looking at something, and we're 10% into the review, and we realize this is a dry well, it would make no sense for us to use our limited resources to pursue something when we've been convinced early on that it's either unsubstantiated or because perhaps the whistleblower or the person who raised the issue raised it through the chain of command. Sometimes that happens too. And it was taken to heart locally, and fixes were put in place prior to our team even getting there. For us to continue to do work and issue an extensive report with the additional requirements on our personnel and cost and efficiency, in the past we administratively closed those. Frankly, we're doing these now because of some misunderstanding as to whether we were hiding something. Anybody that reads these as they come out, and I think we've got 13 out this week, will see that if you were in our position, you'd make the same decision.
Thank you. I've exceeded my time, and I'd like to yield this time to our distinguished ranking member, Mr. Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Lee has got some exigencies, and so I'm going to, if the chair would allow me to yield to Ms. Lee and let her go ahead out of turn.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the gentleman for yielding. We have a budget committee coming up, and I really appreciate being able to ask you these questions. So thank you, Mr. Bishop, very much. Good morning. Good to see you. And first, let me just thank you for responding to report language that this committee placed, I think it was the year before last, with regard to the Oakland Regional Office. We indicated that there had been over 13,000 unprocessed informal claims, and Undersecretary Hickey in her testimony indicated that these were actually duplicate claims, but that still was unacceptable. There were some recommendations based on the report that that you gave us, that we presented back to you, that I believe it was Ms. Juliana Boer, worked with us on. And let me just, there are 3 recommendations, and I wanted to get a sense of what you think needs to happen next. We recommended that the Oakland VA Regional Office Director complete and take appropriate action on the remaining, I think it was 537 informal claims. Secondly, that the Oakland Regional Director implement a plan to provide training to staff on proper procedures for processing informal claims and assess the effectiveness of the training. Thirdly, that the Oakland VA Regional Office Director implement a plan to ensure oversight of those staff assigned to process the informal claims. I think you know that Oakland's been one of the worst, and you've made a lot of progress, so I want to thank you for that. But also, getting to 2015 goal of no disability claim being more than 125 days old, I can't for the life of me figure out how that's going to happen given what is taking place and what has taken place in processing in Oakland. So are you going to continue to investigate, continue to monitor? How do we make sure that we reach the goal of 2015?
I think that was a stretch goal when it was articulated. I think that there has been extreme emphasis placed on processing claims and a lot of other collateral duties that VBA have fallen by the wayside. And we were in a meeting about this subject, and the answer was, well, we don't have enough staff. And I said, well, we're making millions of dollars in improper payments that could be used to hire staff and get adequately staffed so things can be done right. And I came away from the meeting believing that there was going to be a request for that. They're up against it, there's no question. The increase in demand since 9/11 for the post 9/11 veterans has them and VHA drowning in demand. And as you know, they've been under a fair amount of pressure to try and get this backlog cleaned up. I would applaud their effort, but I'm afraid that it's going to wind up at the Board of Veterans Appeals, or it's going to be temporarily taken off the table, which was part of another initiative they had on the 2-year-old claims, but then it has to come back to be finalized later on. So there are a lot of issues. You're right, Oakland was not one of their high achievers. But
one of the lowest.
Exactly. But thanks to some funding we got through this committee a few years ago, we created that inspection program. And we get to every regional office once every 3 years so we can look at the more difficult claims and see if they're doing them correctly or not, or are they making improper payments, and so on. So we know they had problems with Oakland. The 13,000 you alluded to, as you know, they didn't even have a sufficient record system to be able to go back after the fact and,
Right.
and confirm that they fixed those 13,000. So more work needs to be done, no question.
Okay, so is there a plan to go back to determine if those 13,000 were fixed? And then do you think that the goal of the claims being no more than 125 days old by 2015 can be attained or not?
I don't believe that'll happen, but we all hope it could happen. But like I said, I think it's a stretch goal.
Okay, well, Mr. Chairman, I would hope we could figure out a way to help make sure that goal is achievable, since that is the goal. Because these veterans deserve better than what is taking place now. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lee, and thank you for your service on the Budget Committee. I know you're a little busy today. Hope you got a little sleep. So, at this time, I'd like to recognize Mr. Jolly for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Griffin, Dr. Daigh, thank you for being here. We are coming off one of the great scandals of the last few years within the VA, where your office uncovered widespread abuse, manipulation of wait lists. You are the independent inspector. The President's budget, this is the Appropriations Committee, though, not the Authorizing Committee. The President's budget proposes overall an increase of around 7% for the department, but for your department, for the Inspector General's department, only 0.3%. Your testimony says that you will have to reduce your personnel by 10 full-time employees under the President's proposed budget. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Last year, you issued 310 reports, 880 investigations, 70-something arrests, recovered $2.3 billion. You were responsible for, frankly, uncovering some of the greatest concerns of the American people, and the President's budget proposal requires you to cut staff if enacted at this level. Is that correct?
That's correct.
In your testimony, you referenced, in your oral testimony, I didn't see it in your written testimony, where you sit today, if it was up to you, you would be requesting an additional $15 million?
That's correct.
And what would that enable you to do if at 126 you're laying off 10 people, then at 141, what does that do for your operations?
Thank you. That 45% increase in hotlines, we've got an intake unit that processes those, but when there are serious violations that need to be either investigated or need a medical review by Dr. Daigh's staff or need an audit, the intake unit farms those out to the people that hit the street and do the actual work. So what we would do is we would hire 75 additional personnel. Some of them would be in the intake unit. Some of them would work for Dr. Daigh. Some would work in our criminal investigative unit, and some in the audit staff. It would also allow us to not have to lose the 10 that you've already described.
And I would point this out for the committee. You know, I asked the Secretary when he appeared before us what his budget proposal, what the President's budget proposal included for OIG, and I'm not sure we got a clear answer that day, and I'm not sure if it was obfuscation or perhaps he just didn't know. Is there an issue related to anything in the Choice Act? Was there something, because in past testimony, as I've seen over the past several weeks from the department, both on the Hill and publicly, there's been reference to the fact that perhaps your office did receive additional money sometime towards the end of last year that justifies this increase?
Well,
Or justifies this lack of increase?
thanks to this committee, we received $5 million above the President's budget the last 2 years. The way the omnibus worked out last year, it was like ships passing in the night as far as the pass back from OMB and the appropriation for 15 occurring. I believe that somebody saw that $5 million and concluded that, well, they already got that $5 million in 15. But we use that $5 million to add staff to try and put our finger in the dike to, stay afloat here. And based on the growth in demand, 45% growth, we already had to stop doing some of the cyclical reviews that we think are very important. So we're not just showing up at hospitals when somebody pulls a fire alarm. You need to have a routine inspection process. So there was a memo that came out from the Office of Management saying that there may be either a supplemental or a reapportionment of some of the Choice Act money. Now, my reading of what the reaction has been to that idea suggests that that wasn't going to happen, but I felt compelled if there was going to be a supplemental, based on us having to lose people, to make a serious and sincere request for additional staffing, because we're going under.
Sure. So to be very clear, your position is that nothing that's occurred from the Omnibus to the Choice Act, any additional resources, there is nothing that has alleviated your need for additional money. This would be a real cut.
Absolutely.
If this president's budget is enacted at this level, this is a real cut of 10 employees to your office.
That's right, and we could
Okay.
use twice as much as that, but I don't want to be greedy. I'm serious. There are other IGs that have 1,600 FTE. We have 650.
All right.
And
Thank
we're
you.
the second largest agency in the government.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to, of course, at this time recognize the distinguished ranking member, Mr. Bishop.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me go back to your budget document for a moment to try to follow up on an earlier statement that you made with regard to backlog. I think an OIG review found that the VBA's 2013 special initiative to expeditiously complete disability claims pending more than 2 years was not effective. And the initiatives allowed use of provisional ratings to process claims while awaiting receipt of requested supporting evidence was less effective in quickly providing benefits to veterans than were the existing rating procedures. And you said, although that the completed provisional claims still required a subsequent final rating decision, they were omitted from the VBA's inventory of pending cases, understating VBA's total workload and its progress in eliminating the claims backlog. So basically what I'd like to get clarification on is whether or not when you eliminated the pending cases, did that increase did that distort the number of claims that were still unresolved and still pending?
Yes, it did. I mean, if you took those provisional ratings off the table, even when there might have been one or two of the several claims that had been filed that had not yet been completed, and they weren't included in the count.
Which is really troubling to us because, you know, we're really struggling to get a handle and to hold the agency accountable on the numbers. It just seems like the numbers are ambulatory. They just move all over the place. And we have to have some real metrics so that we can track and we can hold the agency accountable so we can at least discharge our oversight duties. Let me ask you something about your budget request now. You mentioned that the return on investment was 5 to 1, I think, in your testimony. In terms of recovery, the budget document seemed to suggest that it was 3 to 1. So that kind of jumped out at me. But I find it interesting that the funding level is flat because you actually do provide a return on investment of significantly more than has to be expended. Can you explain the different ways that the money is recovered and how it's reinvested back into VA? And if it were reinvested and you're generating that kind of return, why is it that you're not able to utilize that for additional FTEs in order to carry out your responsibilities? Because, I mean, you are definitely a great asset to the taxpayer, to the agency, in conserving resources and recovering resources.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. I don't know where the 3 to 1 number comes from. Was that in the department's documents?
Yes, it's in the budget.
Well, in FY14, our return on investment, which is a number that all IGs use, it was 22 to 1. And that number reflects monetary benefits, money put to that could have been put to better use. Mostly money that's identified in our audits that was either improperly spent or wasted. The recoveries result from our
And I think it was the recoveries that were 3-1.
the recoveries for the last 5 years were 5-1, and that was on criminal cases. That's on when there's a key TAM filed and the government recovers monies that were wrongfully obtained by private sector contractors. Now, some of that money, to the extent that we can demonstrate that VA procured a certain dollar value in drugs that were wrongly identified or were off-market labeling or what have you, VA, once we can demonstrate through our work this is the amount of this drug VA purchased, then VA gets their share of the penalty money. A lot of our fines and recoveries are in criminal cases. That money goes to the U.S. government, mostly to the U.S. Treasury, sometimes to asset forfeiture funds and stuff. But at the end of the day, it's all money returned to the same U.S. government on behalf of the taxpayers.
I guess my question is, you're struggling for lack of resources. You don't have enough FTEs. You're generating significant recoveries. Do you have the flexibility, or does the Secretary have the flexibility to utilize some of this recovery, some of these recovery resources to supplement your FTEs? Do you need to come to us for additional authorities to do that?
I think that due to the independence of the IGs, you don't want to give the impression that we're beholden to the Secretary to provide our funds. So that's why there's a separate line item in the budget. And when we don't get what we request, there's a narrative portion that we're supposed to tell the Congress, this is how much we asked for, and this is how much we were given.
So from the recoveries, though, are you able to, does it come back to you, or it goes back just to the department?
No, it's for the good of the whole, but not to the
whole
IG.
department of the,
No,
of the
some
government.
goes to VA, some goes to the Treasury Department.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, the ranking member. Before I recognize Mr. Rooney, I just want to say we are in votes. I think there are about 9 minutes left in the vote. We will have Mr. Rooney proceed, and then when he is finished, we will recess briefly. It's only 2 votes, so we'll vote on the 2, then come right back. So with that, I'd like to recognize Mr. Rooney for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is pretty brief and kind of specific to Florida, but I think it might reflect a larger issue, and that deals with patients at VA's identity and identity theft. We had an issue down in Tampa recently, as you know, at the James Haley VA Hospital, where this guy, Willie Streeter, was a contractor, and he was in charge of shredding some documents. Well, he didn't shred them, he sold them, and filed, the people that bought them, I guess, had filed fraudulent tax claims and got over $1 million for that. But it's not just that, it's benefits, it's being able to open lines of credit, healthcare fraud, all the things that we know are associated with identity theft. And so I guess my questions are, why do we still use Social Security numbers with regard to patients at the VA? Number 2, would electronic records help this issue? And finally, why do we outsource with the VA the way that we do, especially when there's opportunity for people with felony criminal records to be employed by our taxpayer dollars?
Identity theft is a huge problem. In the last 3 or 4 years, it's been a growing area for our criminal investigative staff. We have sent alerts to the department about the seriousness of this issue, and in the case that you referred to, how easy it is for somebody to gain access to a sufficient amount of information to be able to file a fraudulent tax return. Frankly, Florida unfortunately, is one of the leading areas where people have really made a career out of this identity theft thing in the tax business. We have participated in task forces with the IRS and others to try and combat this. And as I said, we've tried to alert the department on how critical it is that they guard this personal identity information. Certainly, if it's electronic, you won't have to worry about somebody getting access in the case you referred to for shredding purposes. But it doesn't preclude somebody who has access to that electronic data to also do things with it, because each account that you can provide the person with on the outside is got a dollar value that would be shocking, and it's really a serious problem. And then when the actual veteran tries to apply for his benefits, and the IRS says, well, no, you already got your refunds. Well, no, I didn't, and that can take a long time for all of that to get resolved.
What are your thoughts on the whole Social Security number issue, as opposed to using some other kind of identifying?
I think it would be a good idea not to use them. When we have to use them in order to identify medical records for our work, typically we'll just get the last 4 digits of the Social Security number along with a name and what have you, and we feel confident that we've got the right person and the right record. But clearly the Social Security number is one of the key numbers that the identity theft people like to get.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Ms. Roby, I was going to suggest maybe we go vote now, unless you want, if you have quick questions, maybe we can do them quickly, or we can vote and come back.
I probably will use my 5 minutes, so whatever you want to do.
How much time do we have?
You probably have, what, 4 minutes? Around 4 minutes, so.
Let's go ahead. I recognize you for 5 minutes, then we can run downstairs.
Thank you for being here today. Pretty timely. I brought a prop. It's the front page of the Montgomery Advertiser, dealing with 2 individuals who were whistleblowers at Central Alabama VA. These 2 individuals couldn't take it anymore. They had to come forward. We protected their identities. If it weren't for these 2 individuals, we would not know even a fraction of what we know of the atrocities that were taking place at Central Alabama VA. For those of you in the room that aren't familiar, everything from thousands of unread x-rays to a VA employee taking a veteran to a crack house. And so this culture that had been created, my office would not have been able to expose what was happening to our veterans in Alabama, but for these courageous individuals that have stepped forward, and knowing that there was, in that particular environment, that retaliation was a very real thing. And very clearly, through their frustration, they finally exposed themselves because of what has been happening to them. There was a second report today, a news report today, that demonstrates that this is happening all over the country with VA employees who consider themselves whistleblowers, that they too are being retaliated against. There's 120 active investigations into allegations of retaliation at the VA, and so really, sirs, I would want you, as you're here to defend your budget request, to this is my opportunity to hold you accountable as to what you are doing as it relates to these very problematic and disturbing instances where, at the end of the day, the people who are suffering the most are our veterans. And if we can't get it right by them in this country, I'm not really sure what we can get right. So I would just ask you today to address this, why this is happening, and why these individuals are not being protected properly.
I agree with you that our veterans deserve the best. I mentioned in my oral testimony that our contacts with our hotline are up 45%. We got 13,000 more contacts last year than the previous year. We are very pleased to hear from whistleblowers. Dr. Daigh's team has been doing work down in Central Alabama. Our criminal investigative team continues to have open work in Central Alabama. I don't know how much Dr. Daigh can talk about the specifics of what he's looking at down there, but we are responding to these things, and we do take our job very seriously, and it's a tsunami of work, and we're trying to get through it as quickly as we can. David, I don't know if there's anything you can...
No, I'd be glad to comment. I think that without whistleblowers, government can't function correctly. So we're absolutely on the same page there. And I think that we need a mechanism for whistleblowers to come forward to lay out their allegations in as clear a fashion as possible. And then we need to be able to go look at those allegations as factually as we can, so that we have clear allegations and then we have clear facts to either support or refute them. And I think sometimes, and then we need a management at VA that when presented with facts will aggressively respond.
Can I interrupt you for a second? It would be great if we could package it up that nicely.
Right.
But the way that this happened
Right.
is the director at Cavis lied to me.
Right.
And then I went seeking information, and these two courageous individuals told
Right.
me the truth, and now they have been subject to an investigation for telling their member of Congress the truth. So it wasn't like they came forward and said, I'd like to sit down and talk to somebody about what's going on in Central Alabama. They read a news article where the director there lied to me and couldn't sit back and just take it. And so I hear what you're saying. It would be great if it was that
So-
simple, but it's not.
So in real life, what happens when we get allegations and we think that people are lying, or that be either that we think people in VA are lying, that management is not doing what they're supposed to be doing, or not handling things correctly, then I walk down the hall and I talk to the head of investigations. And then the criminal investigation unit will go and address those issues to the extent to determine whether we can put forward or collect the data required to make the case we need to make. So we are not shy about switching quickly between an allegation in my office, an allegation that would best be handled by audit, or an handle that would best be handled by the investigators. That happens all the time. Typically what happens if the investigators start down the road and there's some healthcare aspect to it, then they're the leaders. I append either a physician or a nurse or social worker, depending on what's required to support their understanding of the data, and often reading the medical chart or interpreting some of the hospital data requires someone who does that for a living, and we work together as a team to try to address these issues.
I'm making my chairman nervous because the red light is flashing and the time has run out on our votes, but I just want a real commitment from you guys that you are committed to ensuring that these individuals, not just at Central Alabama, but all over the country, that we take this very seriously and do all that we can through your office and others to ensure that this is not being covered up, that these individuals are recognized for
Could
their
I just
courage.
say that we do work very closely with the Office of Special Counsel that has statutory authority for whistleblowers? And I believe the director's gone, isn't he?
Yes, he is. Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
No, it was important questions. We're at 0 on the clock. 217 members have not yet voted, so take a deep breath. So what we'll do is we will recess this meeting to the call of the chair, but I suspect we'll just be back within 10 minutes, and then respectful of your time as well. So thank you. This meeting is in recess to call the chair.
I'm going to leave all that here, and I've got to take this other stuff with me. Okay, that, yeah, you can take that. Okay, thank you. All right.
Hey, Doug, I gather, we're on a recess, so I gather everything's okay? All right. Yeah, that's it, that's all I got.
on something? I got this and that, how's that? Or I can do the flag with, just like that? Okay, alrighty. Oh, thank you, that one, thank you much. It is hot. If you would put us down at 8, and then we'll try to be seated early. Ashley? Yep. Probably at 6:30 then. Okay, bye-bye. Great, thank you.
That makes you look this wrong.
Thank you. I'd like to bring to order this recess meeting of the Subcommittee on Military Construction, VA. We're going to move into our second round of questions right now. And I know we have to be respectful of your time, Mr. Griffin, but I just wanted to start off with Toma once again. And one question I asked, I didn't get a chance to answer. Is there is there no standard policy for a government-wide, standard-wide policy for IGs to follow about the circumstances in which IGs must release the reports from their investigations and audits?
I believe it is pretty standardized on audit reports. Our audit reports get sent to the Hill and sent to the department at the same time, simultaneously, electronically. If we have a restricted report, which means that there would be Privacy Act issues in the report, we post the title of the report, and if we get 3 requests from the media for that report, we will then redact it and post the redacted version on our website. Other IGs do administrative closures just like we do, and it's a question of if it's a dry well, let's not waste our resources on it.
Gotcha. I'd like to now move on to the ongoing IG review at the Philadelphia Regional Office. We understand that your office has been doing a review during the past 6 months at the Philadelphia Regional Office, and that so many allegations have been raised by office employees that you won't be able to investigate each allegation individually. Perhaps press reports indicate that the concerns being raised include mismanagement, retaliation, waste of government resources, and lack of accountability for certain managers. I realize the report is not yet completed, but can you give us a sense of the scope of the problems in Philly, and how does that office rank relative to other regional offices? Are these problems that you see throughout the country? Is Philadelphia responding to the allegations with staff changes and procedural fixes?
They have put new leadership in Philadelphia. Frankly, we completed our draft report within the past week on Philadelphia. It was a project that just kept growing. Every time we went back there, more issues were put on our plate. If you had a checklist of possible problem areas in different locations in VBA regional offices, you could have checked just about every one of them that came to our attention in Philly, as far as misplaced mail, unprocessed claims. There were issues in the Veteran Service Center. They've got an insurance center up there. They've got 2 call centers. We had issues in all of those locations. So it's a major project to get it back on track where it needs to be. I'm sure we'll have many, many recommendations in the report. Typically, we ask for a response from the department within 2 weeks on a report like that. So, it should be out soon, I guess, is the principal message here. And as far as how it might compare to other facilities, it's very bad, and there are a number of whistleblowers involved there. There's a number of accusations against management there, and that's why it's taken several months to try and get through it all.
Thank you. I'd like to quickly move over to the contract review in the Denver Hospital. The Inspector General has an Office of Contract Review, as you know. Does this office have a regular role in reviewing VA construction documents, and has that office been involved in the controversy about the contract for the Denver VA hospital? Has your office done programmatic reviews of the Denver construction project during its long history, and if so, what systematic problems has the Denver experience revealed about the VA construction process? And just a point of clarification for the members, I think you should all be aware by now, but the total cost, according to Sloan Gibson, over the Denver VA hospital is at $1.73 billion, and that's leaving about an unfunded amount of about $830 million, which is just eye-popping. I know the authorizers are extremely upset about this. I saw headlines today about heads will roll and all that, but it's a very serious matter, and we are watching this issue very, very closely as from the appropriations side, because of this colossal problem that has been dumped on our lap, and we're being asked to resolve.
I would share with you that our audit staff had received a congressional request over a year ago to look at Denver. They started scoping the project and doing some preliminary work And then we discovered that this suit had been filed in court out there by the contractor over payment issues and what have you. And it's similar to tort claims being filed by family members who think that their loved one got improper medical care at a VA facility. Once a tort claim gets filed, it becomes a matter for the Justice Department and the legal system to make the call on whether or not the tort claim is righteous, which would cause us to shut down a review of our healthcare staff on the same subject because at that point it's in the courts. We are capable of doing a review of hospital construction. We are going to launch a review. I had a request the other day from Chairman Miller of House Veterans Affairs on the same subject. Most of the problems seem to be when you get into change orders and lack of oversight as the project is rolling out. And something else we want to look at, the previous secretary had created a VA Construction Review Council a couple of years ago, which apparently didn't succeed in Denver. But we want to look and see what has that Construction Review Council done and what's their charter and does it have the right expertise in engineering and construction and what have you to do what they were set out to do. Personally, you know, in VA, they've got 3 levels of hospitals. There are large ones that have the most sophisticated staff and can handle the most difficult procedures. There are medium-sized, and then there are small ones that have the least complex. And, you know, most of the hospitals are very old, but when you successfully build one somewhere and you decide we need one in Orlando, or we need one in Aurora, Colorado, or we need one in New Orleans, which are where we have activities right now, and you've got the plans for one that came in on time and on budget, well, let's not reinvent the wheel if it's the similar, you know, area that you're trying to service. So we are going to look into that. It won't help any with the end game on the cost in Denver, but we want to find out why it happened.
Well, thank you. We want you to stay on top of that because, you know, this project at $1.73 billion is more than 5 times the facility's original estimate, I think at $328 million. I just I've never just seen a construction disaster of this proportion, and it's just a hard issue. I know the ranking member has, you know, concerns as well, and so with that, I'd like to recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I know that your office has a role, counsel in IG has a contract compliance role. Is that a before the fact or only an after the fact role? Does that particular counselor in your office actually oversee the negotiation of the contract to make sure that the parameters are appropriate, or is it only an after action review at the end of the day? I'm concerned about that to find out whether or not and to what extent your office knew about what was happening in Denver and how early it was known. And I understand that this is under investigation and may be involved in litigation, and there may be some limits of what you can and can't say. But from the procedural perspective and our oversight, I'd like to have some idea of how early you're able to, your counsel is able to get involved in these kinds of things. Because I understand that this contract was very unusual in that they said for X number of dollars, this contractor agreed to build to whatever specifications the VA wanted, and apparently that was fine until the change order started to come in. So I'm trying to understand how there was such a tremendous gap, why it took so long for somebody to recognize that the expected expenditures and the ultimate needs were going to be, that was going to be such a big gap.
My counselors group is the Office of Contract Review and Evaluations. You asked about my counselors group and their responsibilities. Our audit staff was the group that was going to look at Denver until the case wound up in court. We were not involved in the planning. That's a program function of the department. The counselors group does pre-award audits when things are going to be placed on the federal supply schedule. The government, being the huge purchaser that it is supposed to get, most favored customer pricing and so on. So when somebody wants to sell the government aspirin or whatever the, higher cost drug might be, we want to make sure that the VA is getting a competitive price. So they'll do a pre-award to make sure that the contracting officer, who actually works for VA and owns it, is getting advice from our staff and make sure that they take that advice and ask the right questions and get the best price. On the other end, there's a post-award review where if the vendor tells us or tells VA, we will sell this pill for $1 a piece to you because you're the VA and you're a big buyer, and we find out later on they're selling it to Walmart for less money.
Construction, though.
No, we're going to look at that in the future. We were not involved in the planning of that facility, and when we tried to initiate a review, it was already in court. We will be looking at it in the future.
You couldn't look at it if it's in court?
The judge would decide.
I understand the judge would decide, but I'm saying if it's in court, but you still should have the opportunity to be able to review the documents and the status of the case and have access to the court record, shouldn't you?
Well, we can get access, and we will, but while it's being adjudicated in court, my decision wouldn't trump the judge's decision on what should happen.
I understand that, but I'm just saying for purposes of planning and for purposes of understanding what took place and to be able to intercede at the earliest possible moment to stop it from reoccurring in another instance, in another similar instance, it seems to me that the sooner you can get access to that information, whether it's in court or under investigation, whatever, the better it will be for the department.
I don't disagree. Unfortunately, this is not an isolated incident, as you know.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member. At this time, I'd like to recognize Mr. Joyce for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you both for being here. I'd like to follow up on the ranking member's comments, though, that I think would be critically important to have some understanding of what took place there so you can advise and counsel that it doesn't occur again in the initial startups of any of these buildings or things that you have going up within the VA. And I don't take it lightly because I spent 25 years as a DA before I got here, so it's one of those things where I really view your position as the most important at the VA to make sure these type of things don't happen. The things that happened I want to go back to, and I understand the chairman may have asked some of these questions before, and unfortunately I'm on 3 committees and all 3 had hearings this morning, so I apologize if I'm touching into something you already went on. But I noticed that you launched 98 other investigations into manipulations at the fallout from the Phoenix Center, and that your testimony notes that 44 of those have been referred to the VA Office of Accountability Review to address the management issues. The other 54 sites are still under investigation. Could you share with this committee what type of conduct or mismanagement led to the 44 referrals to the VA Office of Accountability Review so far?
There has been a range of different methodologies involved in creating fictitious access time lists, etc. And some of them were potentially criminal. Some of them didn't rise to the level in the view of the U.S. Attorney's Office to be prosecuted as criminal, and when that happens, we turn them over to the Office of Accountability Review.
Why not the local authorities, sir? A theft's a theft.
Well, you have to prove criminal intent
Sure.
in every instance. And in some instances, there were schedulers who would take a call. Veteran says, I need an appointment because I've got this issue or that issue. Scheduler would look at the next available appointment that they had open at that facility, and if it was 120 days from now, they would say to the veteran, well, Mr. Veteran, can you come in on, July 15th? That's our next available appointment. So you're given an option of one date, 120 days from now. You trust that that's the first available date, so you say, well, yeah, I guess I'll take it. Well, when that gets scored as your desired date, that's not really what you wanted. You'd like to come in tomorrow, maybe. But when it gets scored that way, now you're down in the lowest level of the employment food chain, and for some of the schedulers, they didn't know any different. They thought, well, this is the next appointment I have. I can't create something out of nothing if we don't have the staff here to get this veteran in sooner. Then some didn't realize it was wrong because it was the only thing they ever knew. They didn't realize the bigger picture, that if the Congress was not aware of the existence of these waiting times and the demand, which has been recognized now, I know Mr. Jolly co-chaired one of the bills on this, you wouldn't have got that $16 billion in the pipeline to try and hire more staff and create a choice card and everything else. I mean, that's the fallacy of it. I mean, we reported for 10 years on waiting times deficiencies, and it only, caught fire in the past year.
But somewhere in the chain of command, people were manipulating data, correct?
That's right.
Okay. And so the person manipulating that data in order that they would get a bonus, that's not a theft to you?
The performance appraisals in VHA, as you may know from your time there, might have 100 elements that people are rated on, one of which might be access to care. In many facilities, they're not the same everywhere. Someone might say, these are the 5 biggest challenges we have this year in our network or in our medical center. So if the director says, I'm going to go after these 5 things this year, access might not be near the top of his list. Don't misunderstand. It is outrageous. It's outrageous when the principal deputy undersecretary in VHA sends a letter to the whole system and says, stop cooking the books, and says to the leadership out there, this is how they're doing it. This is how you can catch it. They institute a policy to require certification that their numbers are legitimate, and a short time later, they kill the requirement. I mean, it is outrageous. Believe me, I'm with you. And I would like every case we investigate to be prosecuted, but I can't control that.
Well, I think it's ludicrous to have bonuses in place where they can manipulate things to actually get the bonus. People should get paid to do a day's work. And if they don't do the day's work to the best of their God-given ability, they should be fired.
Absolutely. I'm with
I see I'm out of time, Mr. Chairman, but I'll come back later. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jolly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple quick questions. You've studied the opioid prescription issue at length several times over the course of the years. What's your assessment in terms of, or your findings perhaps from previous reports I haven't seen, system-wide? I mean, it can't simply be the one location.
Right. Dr. Daigh's team published a national review last May that identified a half a dozen different problem areas for bad mixing of different drugs and what have you. And we also published 9 other individual reports on opioid use. So I would ask David probably mostly to speak to the national findings.
So, in the time frame of 2012, which is the data that we were able to look at, everybody in VA who received opioids, there were a couple of problems that stood out. the percentage of veterans who were on chronic opioids who also have substance use disorder, that is, they're addicted to narcotics of one sort or another, is in the range of 10 or 12%. The percent of veterans who in the same category have significant mental illness is in the range of 40%. So you have a group of patients that have a very complex chronic disease burden that are very difficult to take care of. Notwithstanding that, there is a directive, a guideline that's been put out by DOD and VA that talks about the proper use of narcotics in patients who are taking chronic, who are taking chronic opioids. And the bottom line is that VA was not following, the providers were not following, with astounding figures, not following the advice of the guidelines. So for example, you're supposed to get a urine drug screen at certain intervals, wasn't occurring. You're supposed to not give refills, early refills under certain circumstances. That was also not occurring. So everywhere we've looked across the system, we've seen that as a major problem.
What triggers a site-specific review for your office?
So typically, at current time, last year I got out of the distilled hotlines 2,400 complaints of healthcare issues that came to my group. And so that works out to be something like 20 a work, or 10 a workday plus. So we look at those. A portion of those I don't have the manpower to address, so I send a letter to the director of the VISN, usually above the facility, and say, please respond to these allegations, having removed the person who made the allegation, trying to get by the whistleblower issues. Sure. We pick about 60 or 70 cases, that's about the workload I have, and we go and look at those. So it's a combination of, if everybody's out looking at Phoenix, I have to send some out. If people are in the office and we have the workload, then we go out and look at them. So essentially it's an allegation either from our doing a CAP and surveying the employees and hearing that there are problems with narcotic use, we would then trigger a hotline and go look, or we get a hotline allegation.
So you're responding basically to, you can see site-specific allegations or concerns, and obviously if you see a cluster of them, that's where you shifting gears real quickly, and I've raised the issue with the secretary. I've only been in office for a year, and at least 4 times now I've had a constituent come in with a letter from the VA expressing their regret at the veteran's passing, but the veteran's actually fully alive. It's very disruptive to their benefits. We work it, and about 2 months later, they get a letter saying, we reviewed your file and determined you're in fact alive. It does sound funny. It is, as you can imagine, though, disruptive for benefits and so forth. The secretary has indicated it's something he's working on. He's kind of put it on Social Security. Has your office ever looked at this? I mean, I realize it's not a crushing issue in everything else you're dealing with, but have you had any exposure to this or looked at this?
We're aware of the anecdotal type stories that you've mentioned, and I don't know what to attribute.
That's fine, and it's just a curiosity.
We haven't done a review or anything.
Yeah, I appreciate the Secretary's affirmation that he's looking into it. Mr. Chairman, no further questions. The only thing I would say on the record is I would hope our subcommittee can find a way to improve on the President's request for OIG. In this year, in this time window, to give our stamp of approval to a budget for the OIG that requires a reduction of 10 full-time employees is an issue of great concern. If anything, I think we need to be looking at how to improve the resources and the personnel that provide the investigations and oversight into the VA. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Appreciate the members' comments, and we're going to do our best on that front. Now recognize Mr. Fortenberry for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, gentlemen. Nebraska has one of the highest VA-rated systems. We're proud of that. But an ancillary problem to the larger problem of claims processing and patient management load is that Nebraska has taken on work from other states. Now, I think they've gladly done that and absorbed that with the capacity we have, but we can't get in a situation that starts to create backlogs for ourselves. We've been informed by several groups that that appears to be the case. Are you aware of this dynamic?
We are aware, and we have done an audit on the process of farming out claims. I'm from the heartland myself.
Well, no wonder you talk
People
so
out-
plainly and give straightforward answers. Thank you.
People out
Refreshing.
there, I mean, in those, some of those offices out there, we just seem to be able to, maybe it's cost of living, maybe it's, you know, better management.
clean living, I
or-
think,
Exactly. So, but we did a review of this policy that VBA had of shipping around these claim forms. And naturally, if you're the person who owns a claim that's 2 years old, you're happy to ship it off to somebody else. If you're on the receiving end, frequently there's a reason why it's 2 years old. It wasn't a grounder. It wasn't something that somebody could grab hold of and quickly dispose of and you know, and resolve the issue. We found that the claims that we looked at, and I'd be pleased to send a copy of that review up to you so you can have the information in it. It actually extended the time period to
Oh,
get
is
the
that
things
right?
done, as opposed to
Further
making it more
complicated the
timely.
situation.
Yeah.
Well, that's another ripple effect of the initial core problem. So I appreciate your awareness of that.
Right, and frankly, when everything is electronic, it's still a work in progress. It'll even be easier to electronically transfer a claim to a more productive office, which conceptually might not be a bad idea, but maybe you need twice as many people in your office in Nebraska, and then you can do more workload.
I want to turn to a second issue. There's several court cases where involving VA chaplains who were censored and prohibited from applying the tenets of their beliefs. Now, I don't have the latest information on that. Apparently in 2013, several were forced out of the chaplain training program. Is this something that you investigate to ensure that the VA is not acting out of discord or confusion or against legal precedent?
I can tell you we have not investigated that to date. If there's more information that you would like to provide to my staff, we'll be happy to look into it.
My own information is a bit limited, but apparently there is a manifestation of some real problem here. But if you would be willing to receive additional information as we get it, that would be helpful.
Please do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You have further questions from any of the members? You know, before you do, I was going to ask just one question.
Sure.
And then if it's okay with the ranking member, I would just ask, recognizing Mr. Joyce briefly. So with that, I just wanted to ask one other question, Mr. Griffin, on Legionnaire's disease and VA facilities. Your office was very active in exposing the Legionnaire's disease patient care problems in some Pennsylvania facilities. In response, the VA is using a total of, I believe, $167 million in 2015 and 2016 Choice Act funding to make infrastructure changes to prevent recurrence of the Legionnaire situation. Do you think that the VA plans are sufficient to address this problem?
We did do the specific review in Pittsburgh. We also did a national review. I'm going to ask David to respond to that. It's not unique to VA facilities, and there's actually a higher percentage of these problems in the Northeast than there is in other parts of the country, but David could speak more eloquently to the problem.
Legionella is in everyone's groundwater, so depending on the exact species of Legionella that's in the groundwater where you reside, then everyone is at some risk for it. It is a national problem. VA does have a national attempt to deal with this problem. I'm not aware of exactly the program you're talking about that that you're speaking of for $167 million. I don't know exactly what they're doing, but clearly there does need to be an effort to try to ensure that the water going into hospitals does not contain pathogens like Legionella. So I haven't looked at that. I don't know what that buys is what I'm trying to say in order to answer your question directly.
Thank you. Does the ranking member have any additional questions? Okay, then we'll recognize Mr. Joyce, and then that'll end the hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In your testimony, you referred to 24 recommendations that the VA made to implement immediate and substantive changes in response to rampant fraud in the scheduling system. As of March 2nd of this year, 18 recommendations are still open. What development have you seen in implementing those 18 remaining recommendations?
You're referring to the Phoenix recommendations, right? I'd like to give you all 18 for the record, if I may, because I don't have all 18 of them on the tip of my tongue. But one of the principal recommendations was to finally, after many years of abortive attempts to create a viable scheduling system, that the VA get that system in place that can be remotely audited. So if someone, in a facility is playing games with the numbers, that could be detected remotely by somebody in Maine VA, in the IT world, or in VHA. I know that they've put out some requests for proposals on how they might do that. There are some off-the-shelf applications that are being reviewed. I think from the standpoint of being able to demonstrate a serious requirement being addressed, that would be one of them. The old system, if the doctor wanted to see the veteran in 6 months, the software wouldn't allow them to schedule it immediately because it was too far out, which is part of the answer, frankly, on some of these paper wait lists. In order to keep track of those, to insert them when you were within the window of being able to put them into the system, they maintained separate lists instead of the electronic wait list, which wasn't capable of handling that information. So certainly one of the key recommendations was on accountability, and that's a work in progress. I don't know, David, if anything comes to mind for you that...
There were a number of ethics issues and adjustments they were going to make in terms of how they train their workforce. And there's also the issue of notifying and reviewing the cases we identified where harm had occurred, both the deaths and harm that we occurred. So, and I don't know exactly where they are on notification for those cases, but that would be part of what we could provide back to you and follow up.
Do you feel it's part of the decentralization? I heard you say that you want to find something where you can remotely check to make sure that the numbers are not being manipulated, and this occurred as a fault of VA sort of being decentralized through all of these different establishments, and it'd be better if we had it under a central unit?
As President Reagan once said, trust but verify.
Yes, absolutely.
I think to have the capability to monitor remotely what's going on would certainly, put a little strength in the system. I do believe that because this went on so long, that people just got blasé about it. They didn't think about it. We reported over 10 years. We did 20 reports on this. We testified 19 times before the Congress, and finally it took traction thanks to some aggressive, oversight from the Hill. When you have the second or third highest person in VHA sending out a directive saying knock it off, and making a requirement for certification, and then very quickly it's removed, it went to the highest levels.
Right.
And it certainly existed at the director level in some facilities. I'm not saying everybody, but it was accepted practice, and it might have been. I mean, if a director said, we don't have enough doctors to do these things in 30 days, and then the requirement got cut to 14 days, well, if you can't get them done in 30 days, you're not going to get them done in 14 days. I referred to a stretch goal, which maybe is you want people to stretch and do the best they can, but if it's unrealistic, people in the field might be saying, what are they thinking about? We're drowning in veteran demand, and we don't have the resources to deal with it. So there needed to be some honesty and say, look, we either need twice as much money to do fee-basis work, or we need this number of clinicians. But if you don't have staffing standards, it's hard to determine what the number of clinicians is that you need. So we've been beating that drum also.
It's just astounding, don't you agree, that there's no red flags or bells and whistles that were set off that would have caught this very early in the stages? As you say, it went up the chain of command, and then the quick rescission of that must have made everyone think that this is okay. This is
It was a
standard
failure.
operation procedure.
It was a failure in leadership at multiple levels.
Well, just briefly, what we can do to help you to that effect, please let us know, because I think everyone here is committed to make sure that it doesn't ever happen again, or we clean up the system that's in place. And secondly, I know there's a lot of young prosecutors, ladies and gentlemen, in city and county offices who also have veterans in their jurisdiction. They'll be glad to help you and assist you in a local. I know the Department of Justice is very busy, and that the U.S. Attorney's Office are busy, but it's theft is theft. And so anyway, they can help you.
We want to do quality and timely work, and at the current inflow of requests that we get, we can't do it, and it disturbs me greatly. And as I said earlier, we had a 38% increase in requests from the Congress. If you send me a request, I don't want to take a year or 8 months or whatever to do it. I'd like to turn it around in 90 days, if possible, quicker if possible. But when you get into these things like Phoenix consumed half of our staff for the better part of a year. This Philadelphia review just kept growing and growing and growing, and we want to be part of the solution. And in order to do that, you have to be able to do things timely, make solid recommendations that everybody understands, get the department to acknowledge, yes, we admit we have a problem, and make them describe the solution, and then we follow up until it happens. That's what we want to do.
Well, thank you very much. Good luck.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. This concludes our hearing. I have 2 more questions I'm going to submit for the record, and hopefully you can get back to us on these 2 questions, which I think you already partially addressed. So that, I want to thank everybody for their attendance today. Appreciate your presence today, Mr. Griffin, Mr. Daigh. This time, this meeting of the subcommittee is adjourned. Here are the 2.